Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome once again. Well, after our last exciting lesson on measure 2, you probably couldn't wait to see what comes next. Well, guess what? It's measure 3. How about that? So, our goal today is to introduce the measure 3 verbs, both the patterns and meanings. Now, the good news is, if you've been following along so far and you really learned your measure 1 and measure 2, this is going to be very simple because we're just going to make a minor tweak to measure 2 and we'll be on our way. If you didn't learn those, go back and do it because trust me, this will start to turn into alphabet soup if you do not. Alright, now let's begin with a little bit of review. We went over measure 1 and we said this was the basic meaning of any root, right? To eat, to write, to drink, to work, and so forth. Great. This was of the pattern fa'ala, just the 3 consonants or 3 letters. Okay. Then we had measure 2. Remember, measure 2 was causative. That means to cause whatever the meaning of measure 1 is. And you remember how we formed that pattern. If not, we've got big problems. Right, we put a shedda over this middle radical. Darasa became darasa, and so forth. Great. Well, we're going to do basically the same kind of tweak to get to measure 3. So hopefully this is going to seem very simple. And as we go through, all these measures are going to seem like just minor adjustments, and that's good. The easier it seems, the better. We don't want this to be difficult on you. So, measure 3 has the meaning of reciprocal. What does that mean? That means like do unto others as they do unto you. Here's an example. This is one way. Measure 1. Daraba. Here we have reciprocal, right? The idea of doing back and forth. Okay. And if you think about it, it's really neat that Arabic has a special measure just for this. Okay, so the pattern is very simple. If you remember measure 2, we doubled this letter. Well, forget that. Go back to reset. And instead, we're going to add an aleph in between the first 2 root letters. So, fa'ala. Okay? Kataba, darasa, and so forth. Okay. So, now important thing to note here is this aleph that you see, this becomes part of the word. So we're going to look at some measure 3 verbs. That aleph is an integral part of the word at that point, as much as these other 3 letters are. This is important because if you remember in some of the other grammar points and conjugations that you've learned in Arabic, you learn that long vowels can drop out. They can disappear, they can change. In this one, that's not the case. This becomes part of the word. The only situation in which this will change is a grammatical situation we're not going to discuss at all in this lesson or in this course. Okay, so we have fa'ala, and we just plug in our 3 root letters and we get measure 3. Okay, let's look at an example. Now, as always, remember what we discussed before. We have the pattern and the meaning. Now, patterns, these are solid. These are absolute rules. The meanings, of course, with any meanings, there's some slip and slide. They may not be obvious. They may have changed over time. So here we have one of our favorite roots, right? Kataba. Kataba, of course, the measure 1 of this is to write. Hopefully you remember, right? Really basic kind of verb. Okay, so first of all, what would the measure 3 look like? Exactly. Kataba, again, with this aleph in it. Now, this is now part of this word. And the meaning is going to be to write to each other. 2 people or 2 things, 2 entities writing to each other, or in English we call this to correspond. Now, this is not a word we use that much in English now in the days of Snapchat and Twitter and so forth. But back when you actually had to write letters, this was important. But again, notice, does the word correspond look anything like to write? No, I mean, there's nothing to tell you what the relationship here is. In Arabic, it's very clear. This aleph tells you that this, whatever it is a reciprocal form of this. Pretty good, huh? I know it, you're sold. You say, I want more examples. Okay, here we have the verb amila. Amala, as you know, is to work. Again, very basic measure one kind of meaning. So, how are we going to form the measure three? Exactly, we're just going to insert an aleph, amala. Just interesting to note, as you remember in measure one, the middle vowel can change. It can be any of the three. In all the other measures, they're standard. So this is it's always feta, amala. Okay, so that is definitely how we write the measure three. What's it going to mean? Okay, well, think of the idea. To work back and forth. What are we talking about? All right, to trade, to do business, to treat. It's the idea of there's a mutual working going on here. Okay, and this is really all there is to it. An important grammar point here is that these measure three reciprocals, they do not take a preposition. This is what we call transitive. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, let's look at an example. Here's a good example. Kataba at-talib ila al-ustadh. Okay, so the student did what? He wrote to the professor. Notice we need the illa. You can't drop the illa. Kataba at-talib al-ustadh. That would mean like he wrote the word al-ustadh. No. Okay, it's just like in English. He wrote to. Now, notice this. In Arabic, kataba at-talib al-ustadh. Notice there's no illa. We didn't forget it. Now in English, right, reciprocal type of verbs, sometimes yes, sometimes no. We don't say the student corresponded the teacher. We'd say corresponded with. We wouldn't say corresponded to. We'd say corresponded with. But in Arabic, no, we don't have a preposition here. Why? Because this verb by itself means two or more entities doing the action back and forth. Okay. Because we could have just right, kataba at-talib, the student wrote. He wrote something. Or here we need an illa to say he's writing to. By definition, this has it in there. And so this is going to be the case for measure three verbs. So don't think that something's missing and don't put it in there when it doesn't need to be there. Great, isn't this wonderful? You think, well, this is so simple. This is great. I hope you're not going to throw any curveballs at us. Would we do that? Well, of course, this measure does have some secondary meanings to it. And quite frankly, some of them are kind of hard to see the relationship. One of the secondary meanings is to attempt whatever the measure one is. Now, very oftentimes, it's both reciprocal and attempt at once. And you'll see what I mean here. When we look at a famous measure one, qatala. Qatala, of course, is to kill. All right? Qatala, to kill. Really nice direct verb there. Now, qatala. Now think about this. Qatala does not mean, two people kill each other simultaneously. Now, that wouldn't be a verb you have to use a whole lot, although this particular verb is used quite a bit. Qatala, okay, they're trying to kill mutually, but this is the what? To war, to fight. And so there's there's definitely a reciprocal meaning to this, but there's also the idea of the attempt, like the word haraba. Haraba is to make war. Again, it's the idea of it. Mutual is in there as well. Okay, but I mean, the context kind of tells you what's going on here. Okay, so there are some secondary meanings, so don't get too hung up on measure three thinking, okay, I've got to find who is the other subject, because in some cases, in some cases, the meaning has sort of slipped over the time. Okay, great. So let's move on to conjugations. Well, it's good news on conjugations, and this is going to be true as we go through all the rest of the course. If you learned what we did at the beginning, then you're good to go. In the past tense, these measures conjugate exactly like 1 and 2. Just take the stem and put the endings that you already know. So, ana qataltu, anta qatalta, okay, anti qatalti, huwa qatala, هي قاتلت أنتم قتلتم نحن قتلنا versus right قتلنا قتلت and so forth. But the conjugation, you don't have to remember any new conjugation, just put this stem in there. Okay, now present tense is also good news if you learned the conjugations for measure 2, and you should have to make it to this point. We're just going to use the same thing for 3. What do I mean by this? Okay, here's our measure 2. You know it has a shedda here, which we don't have to write in because it's 2. You know that. But remember the vowel pattern, right? It was you, fa, il. And we said it's always this pattern, u, a, I. Yufa'il, yukatib, yudaris, and so forth. Well, we're going to use the exact same vowel pattern, just now put in our measure 3 stem. Now remember, all this is stem, right? The root letters, fa, ain, lam, this aleph now becomes part of the word, so this is our stem. We add a u at the beginning, u, u, nu, tu. It's always going to be that u sound. So when you hear an u at the beginning of a conjugation, you know it's not measure 1. Okay, yufa'il. So very, very similar pattern here. And again, it has how many syllables? 3. Yufa'il, yukatil, yudarib has 3. Remember, measure 1 had the 2. Yaqtal, yaqtal. And so when you hear that, you can definitely tell that we're dealing with one of these 2 measures. Now they are going to sound fairly similar, but you know it's not measure 1. Okay? Now let's look at the present tense conjugations. Remember, when you say these, emphasize the oo sound. You have to be very clear. Don't miss this, or you're going to confuse the person you're speaking to. Right? So, ana uqatil, anta tuqatil, huwa yuqatil, anti tuqatilin, هي تقاتل نحن نقاتل هم يقاتلون and أنتم تقاتلون. But always that oo sound at the beginning is very important. Okay, and so this is basically it for measure 3. You're saying, oh, that's simple. We just made a minor little tweak. Basically, we just switched that shedda for an aleph, and everything else stayed the same. Well, that's going to be the way it is from here on out. So if you get these patterns down, then the rest of the measures are going to be simple. If not, well, then you're going to have to go back and revisit them. So, on behalf of my good friend Gracie here, we want to wish you all the best of success with your Measure 3 adventures. We will see you very soon. Shukran jazilan wa ma salama.